someone from the University of Alberta has been trying to get my videos of my confrontation of them taken offline, as well as my confrontation of the Parkland Institute. Now, I'm not sure who that is, but it is telling. Like, they're scared about something. They're scurrying around like rats in a cage. They haven't responded to my email requests for answer questions. So basically, to hold them accountable, my questions that I've asked were basically, I asked them what material support they gave to Derek Jensen and to the event that hosted him, which was a 3-day training workshop for activists. Now, when you have a man who's literally calling for the violent overthrow of civilization, one tends to wonder what kind of training these folks are getting. Makes you wonder if the burnt-out police cars and the violence that took place in New Brunswick was something advised or trained by Derek Jensen and his crew. Now, actually, that's something we're going to be talking about, because Kriss Sims, she was there actually a day after all that happened, and basically reporters from, Global News and CTV News were carjacked by Idle No More protesters, and they were threatening to do the same to her, but she was in an unmarked car, so they didn't really know who she was, and she basically, as a woman, she threw herself at their mercy, and the leader, I guess, has some sort of chivalry and let her go. Anyway, how goes it? We almost up there? Alright, well, Ryan runs a blog website called dissembling.org, where he's actually covered, because my website's still under construction, so I've been working, doing a lot of research, and he's been publishing on his website about the whole Derek Jensen affair, and he actually does a lot of work exposing the collectivist hordes of the New World Order and their push for a collectivist revolution. Now, I've said this before once, and I've said it again, I'll say it again, I do believe that the goal of these people is a violent Marxist revolution here in Canada. And I'm not saying, the system as is now is perfect. I think we need some sort of revolution, but it's not a violent, bloody revolution, an intellectual revolution, a revolution of mind and spirit, a revolution of liberty. Not this Marxist, bloody crap that they want. It's, you look through history, and what these people want always ends in horrible bloodshed. It's true. All these people, they follow the same mindless, uneducated rhetoric that the communist revolutions throughout history have wanted. And it always ends up bloody. It always ends up in tyranny. And I don't want that to happen here. And not on my watch anyway. If you want to have a collectivist commune, go at it. Get a chunk of land, declare your own nation, have communal ownership of everything, if that's what you want, and I have no problem with that. I wouldn't go anywhere near anything like that, but if that's the system you want to live under, if that's the way you want to live, I would never use the force of government. I would never use any force to stop you from living how you want. But unfortunately, the history shows these communist collectivists, they don't show us the same respect. They if you look through this, I keep on focusing on the Spanish Civil War, but that's a perfect example of the type of bloodshed, that's a perfect example of what would happen if they got control. You know, the Spanish Civil War, you can't even say that it was just Stalinists or just Marxists. These people were anarcho-communists. They were like collectivist anarchists. They got control of a region, and they slaughtered people they slaughtered people who had any opposing right-wing point of view. And this is what always happens in communist revolutions. I think we're joined by Ryan Elson now, though. Hey, Ryan, you there, buddy?
I'm here, Richard.
Hey, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good.
Well, thanks for coming on. Do you have anything to add to what I've been talking about?
Well, I would totally agree, and I've been watching this movement for a while, and it seems to be nucleated from the cities. I mean, if you look at all the commentary out there about the trendies, right? Well, the fact of the matter is a lot of this stuff is being disseminated from educational institutions, and that's mostly where the communists get out of society. It's how they can engage in a coup d'etat, is to corrupt your education institutions and then successively indoctrinate people's children. And I mean, it's pretty disgusting to think about parents just unwittingly sending their kids to one of these institutions. Their kids go $20,000-$30,000 into debt, and
if they're lucky,
if
they're lucky, they only get $20,000 or $30,000 into debt. Sometimes people go to post-secondary institutions for 4 or 5 years, and they're literally hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt to be indoctrinated.
The funny thing is they pay for this, and what do they get in return? They get indoctrinated into blowing up dams and electrical grids, because these faculty members, they're showing their solidarity, and they're promoting this guy that they should just be absolutely embarrassed to be associated with. And the funny thing is like when you mentioned the whole Parkland Institute connection with the University of Alberta, that got me excited, because, I mean, pulling at this string is what makes their whole network unravel, because you can just see what monsters these people are when they go out of their way and scramble and try to cover it up and sweep your questions under the rug and hope that it all gets forgotten about and goes away. And it's not, because I think we need to fight like hell to make sure that people take notice of this kind of behavior going on in these education institutions. This is totally where it's coming from. The pipe bombs in Rexton, New Brunswick, for example, oh yeah, how do you think those got there?
Well, obviously, there is a violent overtone to everything the left, the far left. And, you know, I wonder how much your moderate center left type person really identifies with this stuff or not. But I do find it very telling when that they acted like scared, like deer caught in the headlights when I went there, and now they're trying to silence me by getting my videos removed from YouTube.
Well, it goes even beyond that. I mean, like, you'd think that they would get the point after being screen captured a bunch of times, fiddling around with their page. They panicked so much that they got rid of the ability for people to post their own threads on their timeline.
Talk about that, how you were on the Parkland Institute's Facebook page and how they've been responding.
Well, I mean, like, you had a week of waiting to do since you sent them those questions, right? And I'm thinking to myself, well, 1 week is more than plenty of time to respond to them, and basically they're blowing you off, right? And they're just jerking your chain and trying to get you to do some work, and then trying to get you to forget about it, and then, like, you know, later on maybe they won't get asked the hard questions, right? Well, what I see is they need the opposite. And I'm going to spend my time trying to make sure that there's more and more and more and more and more people asking them the hard questions, because from my perspective, it looks like people's tax dollars are ultimately paying for what's going on there, and that is deeply concerning.
Oh, yeah, well, it's, this is very indicative of post-secondary institutions. Like, even in Toronto, they're funding, like, far left-wing. The Toronto District School Board has been exposed as showing far left-wing propaganda to children. they're asking kids, not just in the United States, but here in Canada, to wear wristbands to recognize their so-called white privilege. They're pushing all sorts of weird, twisted things in the schools. It's actually quite bothersome. And the thing is, it's not just post-secondary institutions anymore. It's the primary schools. It's the elementary schools. People are pushing this ideological poison, this political correctness, this Frankfurt School garbage on kids of all ages. And it's addictive, because when kids are 18 or 19, they're in a very, very, I would say, influential point in their life. They're trying to find out who they are. They're trying to, they're in a time of self-discovery, and it's a really bad time to be telling people, oh my God, you're killing the earth, and you should blow up dams.
Well, basically, they're running a doomsday cult, right? I mean, it's imperative for them to save the planet, and the way to save the planet plays into the hand of Agenda 21, which is totally into the hand of the elites, because the elites want to keep the evolution of mankind to themselves. They don't want to share it. And so the way that they do that is they convince, they indoctrinate a bunch of children, including targeting of indigenous cultures, because they have a bone to pick. And so, like, what I'm viewing happening here, the same entity that threw the indigenous smallpox blankets is totally playing them and getting them to do their bidding as their pawn. And it's disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting to watch them do this and get away with it without people taking notice that ultimately, if you follow the ideologies of Derek Jensen, the end result would be genocide.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, how many people? Think of it this way: how many people would starve to death? How many people would starve to death if they got their way? Like, if they think of it this way: if industrialized society collapsed tomorrow, how many people would starve to death because we weren't able to produce the amount of food needed to feed everyone?
Well, it goes even further, because, like, if you have no electrical grid, you have no refrigeration, people's stores pretty much expire right away, right?
Well, exactly. Part of the reason we are able to feed people is because we can refrigerate and freeze, like, meat, refrigerate vegetables and freeze meat and transport it. And
let's not forget about the dams. I mean, I guess they want people to have no water, no electricity, no food, because, I mean, that what he's advocating basically covers all three. And yeah. Even beyond that, if you, like, listen to what he says about, like, people using cooking fires and stuff, it's retarded. If you look at the studies that are out there, how many people do you think are going to be able to get away with doing that without an environmental impact, according to the very studies that his pals are making up on it? I mean, like, doesn't he agree with the Greens that are coming up with these studies?
Well, yeah, that's very interesting, because, yeah, that would be a huge amount of CO2 released in the atmosphere, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but, you know what I mean? It's not great, but according to what their worldview is, that's supposed to be the worst thing ever.
Exactly. I mean, well, just point out, according to their worldview, what this man is advocating and how the glowing reports that they give him. I mean, the Parkland Institute has been aware of what Derek Jensen said in that video that Genuine Woody put up called The Worst of Derek Jensen, about blowing up dams and blowing up electrical grids, and how we need more activists to do that or something.
Oh yeah, he said basically we need people to blow up dams, we need people to take down the electrical grid. And that's exactly what he said. And have you watched N.Civ?
Yeah, the whole film is basically an indoctrination video. The whole thing. I mean, if you watch it beginning to end, you should, like, the people who are in it, they should all be embarrassed for what they're promoting, because they're promoting genocide.
Yo, exactly. Well, think of it one step further. Think of the kind of totalitarian regime that would need to exist to enforce what he wants, enforce that kind of deindustrialized society. Because honestly, most people, if industrialized society was taken down, people would be like, well, this is horrible. I'm going to build some machinery because I'm an engineer. You know what I mean? So you need some sort of authoritarian regime to actually prevent people from using technology.
Exactly, and that's why the universities are important, because that's where most of our technology comes from. It comes from the educated, who are given the tools to be able to do what needs to be done in order to discover things and produce something of those discoveries, right? So the same people, if that amount of people, faculty members, and I mean, there's a vast swath of faculties that are involved in the promotion of Derek Jensen. University of Victoria. There's also the AESA. That's a conglomeration. They just had a conference in Baltimore, Maryland, of many faculty members of universities all across the United States. So if you take a step back and you look at the bigger picture, it's pretty disgusting how much this has infiltrated the whole network of educational institutions.
Well, yeah, didn't your research showed they did a talk at Derek Jensen made an appearance at the University of Victoria, did he not?
Oh, absolutely. He's had several appearances, actually.
Well, I think it's time for next time he shows up, we need to, I'll make a trip down to the island to make my presence known and show that no, I will not sit idly by while you are promoting a man who basically is promoting anti-technological genocide.
Well, yeah, exactly. But see, that's going to be fanning the flames big time, because
you guys are deep. I know you guys are deep behind
really
enemy lines.
In the anarchist circles, right? And the anarchists, they are well trained. They have a strategy for dismantling opposition, as you might already know, based on your previous guests that you've had on.
Yeah, totally. Well, the thing is, you know what? It's hard for you. I really sympathize for you guys. I'm in the heart. I'm in the last bastion of liberty here. I'm in Grand Prairie, Alberta, which is a town where people work hard. They want to keep what they own. They are they believe they're not politically motivated, but there's almost like an underlying libertarian mindset here, because people work hard and they want to keep the fruits of their labor. You guys are right on the front lines. You guys are deep. Actually, you guys are deep behind enemy lines. Really, you are.
It's really brutal out here. And the funny thing is if you look into the union involvement as well, most of these faculty members, they're tied into unions that are tied into the CLC. So, for example, the University of Victoria staff, I believe they're associated with COOP. And as you might already know, COOP sponsored Occupy Toronto.
Oh, yeah?
So it's a vast web. What I would describe the resultant output of a military-industrial complex, just designed to engulf absolutely everything. You look at it from the financial aspects, like the financial system and how it's designed to eventually get everything into the hands of the bankers, and how the people who are offering the solution, it's the educators, the same ones that are basically promoting Derek Jensen, for example. And how the United Nations, through Agenda 21, wants to deindustrialize and decolonize. The whole thing is some, totally racist, sick, perverted joke. But, I mean, the only way that these communist societies can ever seem to roll out is to be divisive and to divide one race from another, and to divide males from females, and to try to politically divide people as well. I mean, they're everything left. But if you're right-wing, or if you're a libertarian, or even if you're a centralist, they hate you.
Well, yes, if you don't believe in mass wealth distribution, if you don't buy into this cultural Marxist Frankfurt School framework, then yes, you are a fascist. I've been called a Nazi just for simply questioning Idle No More. I've been called a Nazi for, simply not following the script that I guess all activists are supposed to follow. It's really quite Orwellian the way these guys go on, and it's interesting. Yes, Occupy. I wanted you to go a bit more into your knowledge of the ties between the Occupy movement, Derek Jensen, and the unions, because I know I was doing some research on him, and he's done some talks, some speeches for the Occupy movements in the United States. Do you know if he's spoken at any Occupy events here in Canada?
No, I don't believe so. I believe Derek Jensen originates from the United States, and so that's primarily where his playground is. There is connections with Derek Jensen with the Eunice Taunton camp, as well. There's connections with Derek Jensen with the Rainbow Gatherings, and the Rainbow Gatherings. That's actually a very funny thing because it typically is associated with the indigenous, and here on the island. There was concerns over what these people would do at one of these gatherings to the environment where they were gathering on Victoria Island. And I find that very, very telling as to how these people are going to treat the land when they've deindustrialized everything.
Well, excuse me. Yeah, some of the worst countries, put it this way, the countries with the worst environmental record in history are communist nations. And the reason for that is the communist wealth redistribution, centralized planning system is so inefficient that they can't afford, put it this way, people can't afford to worry about the environment because they're too desperate trying to feed themselves and not starve to death.
Well, I think it goes much deeper than that. I think it goes with the territory of having an authoritarian government that doesn't give a flying fuck about anybody that's doing anything there. They just want output. That's the priority. More output, more control, more power, more money. Right? They're even worse than a capitalist society because at least the people who are capitalists care about what they invest their money in. Like in a communist regime, you don't get that.
Well, honestly, too, though, I do believe that having ownership of land, put it this way, I've used this example numerous times, I'm going to use it again. My dad was a farmer for like 40 years. He cared more about the land and the environment than any of these bleeding heart trendies ever will. Like, he knew how things were supposed to be. He genuinely cared. So people who have land, who actually live off the land and interact with nature and are hunters and are farmers, these are the people that actually know and care the most about the environment because they rely on it to live. And there is something almost, I don't want to get all airy-fairy on us here, but there's almost something spiritual about it because people they experience that connection to the land. And something that none of these pencil neck or overflowing fat bureaucrats or any of these wimpy little trendies are ever going to understand because all they know how to do is whine and complain about problems that really they have it better than a good chunk of the world population. And all they know how to do is sit there and be a victim.
Oh, exactly. And this, it stems from the kinds of programs that they're targeting in these universities as well.
Oh, it totally does.
Sociology, ecological governance, those types of programs. It's that those people have no skills. They have no skills. They're not going to produce anything of value other than a bureaucracy. That's what they're good for.
Oh, totally. Totally. Go on. And
unfortunate thing about it is that these people are so intertwined into the programs, and there's so many of them that they want to do continue what the government has started. The government started by consolidating power structures by amalgamating, by making their management schemes more grand, in scale, and it's a progression towards the final pulling of the rug, where the whole system goes global, and now you don't even get a place to run to if the government's totally railroading you, right? Now, if you don't cooperate, if the government wants, it can just say, "Oh, no money, no food, no water." Right? That's the kind of leverage that we need to make sure that the government doesn't get. So there are solutions that need to be put on the table, and that's what these people hate the most. They hate solutions that cut them out of the picture. They're complaining about industrialization and how it's destroying the environment. Well, the way to fix that is to bring the industrialization as much as possible into people's homes, so that when people need something, they can build it themselves. When people need water, they can clean their own water. When they need food, they can grow their own food.
It's
the reason why they're steering clear from these models is because they want you. They want control over you. They want to destroy your free will.
Well, exactly. They don't want, none of these control freaks, none of them want anyone, they don't want people to be self-sufficient. They don't want people who can rely on themselves and not be part of some global, some sort of like hive system. It's, you know, as much as this has been pushed in the universities, and there is, you know, all this stuff's been pushed in the universities. It really has. I document that. I'm documenting it in my upcoming film that I've been working on for a while. So it's been pushed in the schools and the universities, and there's no doubt about that. But it's really, I don't know. I think it's a, I don't know if it is, if we can place all the blame on the universities or not. I think that there's, I don't know if it's partially, there's something wrong with these people.
You can't put all the blame on the universities, because ultimately it isn't the universities who are pulling the strings. It's just the universities that are facilitating the attachment of the string of which a higher-up organization selectively yanks on. So for the universities, I would say it would be SIGI, the United Nations, and like the programs. They have a revolving door, just like the capitalists have, which is really funny, because it's the exact same revolving door, just in a different context. So the capitalists get into government by being elite and by like having lots of money and stuff, and these like stupid trendy lefties, they get into the government just by infiltrating public works and city hall and other institutions like that. So I mean, the level of control that they have over us is just startling. It's startling, and I keep coming to the conclusion that the only possible way out is to form nucleuses of our own, of liberty-minded folk who want to live on their own, who don't want to live in an authoritarian system, because like ultimately, I think the burden of the proof should be upon the system, and it shouldn't be a sweeping generalization like what they're doing. They're applying a sweeping generalization to all of us. We're all guilty of destroying the environment, which is not true.
No, exactly. Like, you know, we have to define our terms, because I don't consider capitalism a dirty word myself. I think it's been dragged through the mud by the left. To me, capitalism just means a system based on the voluntary exchange of goods and services by people using an agreed-upon method of exchange, i.e., some form of money. You know.
Well, here's the thing: you're entitled to the fruits of your labor. You should get what you think is reasonable for lifting a finger. And somehow there's this coercive entity that has figured out different methodologies scientifically to be able to overcome a person and just get them to do what they want instead. And so what I find would be like the best thing to do is to take a huge step back from the system, take a huge step back from the unions, take a huge step back from employers that just ram contracts down your throats, or like places that sell things that sit there and dictate the price, right? Because that's not how good business takes place anyways. Anytime I've ever engaged in a business transaction that I've felt satisfied over was one that I had some level of empowerment and some level of control over exactly what the arrangement is.
Well, you know, I think so. I think that I genuinely think that a true free market would empower people, because you look at all these banksters. Look at the 2008 crash. There's a difference between what happened and what should have happened. If it was a free market, the banks would have failed. You know, there would have been economic realignment, and then the people who committed fraud would actually been held accountable for that fraud. That's an actual free market. You know, you don't need mountains of red tape and regulation to say that fraud is wrong. If you're selling something telling some people it's one thing when it's actually another, that's basic fraud. You should be held accountable for that. You should not, you know, you should have if you made millions or billions off fraud, you should have your millions and billions taken from you, and you should have some sort of, there needs to be restitution for those who you defrauded. Like, and that's what I don't like about the system we have now, the criminal justice system. It focuses too much on punishment and not enough of restitution to the victims. But that's a side issue. But yeah, why don't you go on a little bit about your research? You know, I know you wrote your on your website for a while. Didn't you just have a different website?
Oh yeah, I used to have a different website, and that's actually how I first started getting into this. I started realizing that if you adapt to what they're doing and come up with a system to expose it, and you just you use a camera constantly, for example, always have a camera on you, have a few spare batteries, have a few spare memory cards, learn how to screen capture and record your screen. Heck, even install a keylogger so that you can go back and review history and catch these people at their games, because that's how you reach into their network. They all operate the same. They're sly, and they'll change what they say later on when you bust them at something. And so you just basically have to zone in on these people who are willing to lie, cheat, and steal their way into this particular agenda. And the thing that draws me in all the time, it's clearly this agenda, right? If somebody is really pushing it, really peddling it, and I mean, after a while of exposing these people, you get the trolls, you get the people coming out of the woodwork who are sent there to waste your time and to keep you preoccupied instead of researching and exposing it. And the thing that I noticed that works the best is when you bookmark like crazy, and then when you write up articles and you publish them, and you have your screenshots, and you have your video, and you have your links and stuff. And the funny thing is I've been attacked through DMCA and through a lawsuit just for doing that, just for doing my job as an investigative journalist and reporting on things.
Can you give us some examples of resistance you've seen, resistance you've experienced for simply covering this type of work in the Communist Republic of Victoria?
Well, for starters, this litigant that I'm involved with, she flies off the handle. So if I were to mistakenly run into her one day in Victoria, that would be a bad day for me, because I wouldn't even have to say anything. I wouldn't have to do anything at all. It would just result in some sort of drama. And the sort of drama that I mean, like, you know, what happened to Greg at the Anarchist Book Fair, I mean, that's the reason why that happened is because the guy had the balls to file an affidavit, and he's since then tried filing a police report. Funny thing is like when I look at the cop shop now, I see that the union that's behind the lead cops that are involved in the Victoria Police, it's the same union that's involved with the University of Victoria, I believe.
Really, and, really. So the cops belong to the same union as the what union is that? And how is it? What union is it? And how is it connected to the University of Victoria?
I believe it's COOP as well.
Okay, and how is it connected to the university?
Well, the university faculty, I believe, are connected with the exact same union.
How? In which way? Are they members? Or are they like just kind of supporters? Are they like? Or basically, are the NDP members that are because I know the NDP is closely aligned with the unions.
See, that's the funny thing. All of the vast majority of these CLC affiliated unions are totally NDP supporters. I mean, my fiance works in a recycling facility, and it's with the LIUNA, which is also connected in with the CLC. And the union dues that get paid to them, it goes towards paying for friggin' NDP propaganda to get delivered to our door. It's ridiculous. It's these unions have no place telling us who to vote for and taking our money and telling us that when we get a job that we have no choice but to associate with them. If we choose to disassociate, then we can't have that job.
Well,
right?
exactly, because in my understanding of the union situation is if you want a certain job in a certain industry, you have to be part of the union, and then the union takes your union dues and then supports like whatever political candidate they think is going to grease their wheels the most.
Oh, communism. May as well say what it is. I mean, the greatest weapon that Soviet Russia unleashed upon this planet was the Union. At first, the unions looked nice and suckered people in, made them feel comfortable, got them higher wages and benefits and perks, but now they're snatching it all away. I mean, my fiance's union gave less than inflation for a raise. That's what they negotiated for. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Nobody should have to get a raise that's less than inflation.
Well, I think, like I said, I think the market eventually is going to take care of it because, like, I'm a true believer in free market capitalism. I really think that, because put it this way, if people aren't making enough money, they're not going to be able to buy your goods. So, if you know what I mean, I think the market gives everyone a level playing field to a certain degree. You're not ever going to have pure equality. Yes, people are going to be born richer. Other people are going to be born poorer. Some people are going to be smarter. Some people are going to be stronger. You know what I mean? Some people are just going to be more motivated. So the only way to have quote unquote equality is to force it upon people using some sort of authoritarian means. Is there anything else you want to cover? I'm going to go to break here pretty soon, and then I'm going to come back with my my interview with Kriss Sims. Is there anything you want to do in the last 5 minutes we have with you here? Anything you want to talk about?
I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own efforts towards making myself more independent and stuff.
Okay, let's talk about that.
I've been working on a project for like a modular industrial automations controller for at home. And
what is that for people who don't understand that?
Well, it's like a computer, and you can program computers and stuff. But what my goal is to make it easy to manage electrical devices attached to that computer. So it's like a greenhouse controller, for example. But I mean, if you wanted to apply it to other things, the goal is to make it diverse enough that you can do that, or you can swap out hardware or sensors or other things, right? What I really want to do is make it possible for people to bring this technology home. Because when you do that, you gain the ability to actually begin to build an industrialized system that is modular and diverse enough to change with the times, right? Because, I mean, let's face it, you build a big-ass factory, that factory is going to have, like, really expensive equipment that they don't necessarily want to replace very quickly. And because it's ran by a corporation, they're going to want to maximize the use of that as much as possible. They want to get the biggest bang for their buck, right? So we're stuck with this dinosaur industrialized system that just simply doesn't want to adapt. And what I'm saying is the key to solving most of these problems is to bring that into people's homes. As crude as it is now, it's going to get very, very exciting in the future. And the only way for that to happen is to make sure that the system doesn't prevent people from doing that. It should be a basic, essential requirement of life on this planet in the future.
Well, I think that as technology, I think you're onto something here. I think as technology improves and increases exponentially to the point where, we can be more free, I think that is what's going to liberate humanity to a large extent. But at the same time, we have to make sure that this technology isn't centralized. It's not kept from people, because through that, basically, is what we can do to empower ourselves. But we have to make sure that the elites, those in control, don't use this Agenda 21 doomsday scenario, this idea that, oh my God, we're all killing the earth, we have to not consume. You don't use this as a predetermined excuse, impetus, a way to basically tell people, no, you can't have the technology. You can't be free. You have to rely on Big Daddy government, and it really is. It is happening, and I'm wondering what is going to happen in the future. I'm wondering if, because I just don't see, the elites are smart, but they're not that smart. I don't see how this centralized plan, a centralized world government, a centralized global system can really work. I just don't see how it works. So I think that at the moment they get their pinnacle...
Richard, I wouldn't worry about it at all, because that's always been their Achilles heel. They always want what they want before it's time. And so they like build up and build up and build up, and then they go for this huge power grab, and throughout history it's failed. And it's going to fail again. Just this time we better make damn well sure that they don't gain the opportunity to do it to us all over again. And basically the skeleton key to this whole problem, the way to prevent them from doing it in the future, is to decentralize on as massive and wide enough scale, all the way down to the individual level, and then that way they never gain the opportunity to put their foot in the door again. And we get to retain our freedoms. And we basically get the ability to uplift ourselves. Because, I mean, if you think about it, like mental disorders, there's cures for that. And we're discovering ways of actually fixing the problem that's with these elites and the anarchists and the other people that I've encountered, like, that are all connected to this network. Most of them are sociopaths. They've lost the ability to give a crap about other people because their agenda is more important.
Well, I don't know. You know, I don't pretend to understand the psychology of what's going on with these people, but what my estimation is it seems like they're very emotionally driven. They have this idea, and it doesn't matter how much logic, reason, or evidence you show to prove them wrong. They have this idea, and they're not going to allow themselves to be proven wrong. And when they start losing an argument, they just swear and get mad at you, or they start to twist your words to mean something it doesn't actually mean. They just...
Oh, Richard, it goes way beyond that, because, I mean, yeah, sure, there's lots of people who are just emotionally driven, and that's how they do their arguments. But as you go up the pyramid of power, like up the power structure, you'll find that those people are not necessarily dupes anymore either. You'll find that a lot of them are calculated and highly strategic in the way that they go about doing what they're doing.
Well, I was talking about the low level, the anarcho-commies and such. Yeah, when you get up to the upper echelon, like the Maurice Strong, the Rockefeller types, yeah, they are intelligent, highly functioning psychopaths who put together these networks and can basically orchestrate events and not even events, but orchestrate networks and create networks and build this kind of idea, this socialist, communist, collectivist idea. See, it's interesting because Elaine Dewar, she met with Maurice Strong, she interviewed him, and he admitted openly to her that he'd created a publicly funded but semi-private intelligence network that had, what was her exact words, that had political influence in Canada and abroad.
Well, and it's interesting that you point that out, because, I mean, the only way for Agenda 21 to actually take a root into people's communities, because most people, they don't want this. They don't want to be slaves. They don't want to be told what to do 24/7 by some authoritarian government. They're repulsed by it, but the system knows that if they can send their little minions out into the town and sell people on the idea using cult indoctrination techniques, using mass mind control techniques, like the Delphi technique, for example. It's a way of building up consensus without people actually agreeing upon it. But when they leave the situation, they believe that they agree.
Yes, it's a consensus building psychological manipulation program that was put together by the Rand Corporation, actually. Yeah. No, I totally understand what you're saying.
But
I totally agree.
Further than that, it goes into the Tides Foundation, okay? Soros is not a nice guy. He defrauded the France stock market. And when you dig into the Tides Foundation, you can see that there's this program called the Interactivist. That's where they're teaching these anarchist strategies like nonviolent communication. That's what they use for de-escalation. So when they come out and they're like ready to beat the living snot out of somebody, and there's witnesses there, they then begin to invoke this training that they've received, which is free, and it goes through all the universities too. and they de-escalate what is going on to evade the consequences. And I mean, if you look at the whole like big picture, from by stepping back, you can see just how vast and sick and just disgusting it is.
No, I totally agree. I think we're gonna wrap it up for now. But thanks for coming on, and thank you so much for your support in helping me expose how Agenda 21 is being implemented and forced upon young, impressionable minds through the universities, through having extremist, violent nut bars like Derek Jensen come and preach to them violence.
Oh, not a problem. And like I tell people, it's my future too, and I want to have a choice. And I think everybody wants to have that choice.
All right, Ryan. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. We'll surely have you on again. All right. Well, we're gonna go to break here. So, and then we will be joined. Then I will show you my. We will play my pre-taped interview with Kriss Sims from Sun News Network. Richard Heathen back. I want to cover this article now. Halifax is a Sun News article titled, "Our Warrior Problem. Militant natives are causing trouble and they aren't going away." Well, Halifax. They block roads, stop trains, and fight cops. Men and women dressed in camouflage, boots, and bandanas. They come from reserves, wave red flags, set fires, tear up roads, and declare sovereignty for their tribes. They are the so-called warrior societies, and they mean business. They even award themselves ranks such as general and lieutenant, and insisting a military wing is part of any sovereign nation. Many Aboriginal rights activists consider themselves members of sovereign free people separate from Canada. Well, I don't have a problem if people want to be separate from Canada. I think we should all be able to break away, get chunks of land, and have our own free nations. Anyway, continuing on, many people arrested in the recent riot in Rexon, New Brunswick, where 6 police cruisers were torched, are members of the Micmac Warrior Society. Charges range from possession of a firearm to unlawful confinement and uttering threats. Dressed head to toe in combat fatigues, Suzanne Paddles was released on a $400 bond and talked to reporters outside and explained where their anger was coming from. You know, I really try to see this from not a partisan political place. Look, I don't want to be at war with the natives. You know, I'm all about, you know what, I have no problem with them actually having their own nation. They call themselves First Nations, and I don't think right now they actually have their own nations. But I'm not against that. I'm not against that point of view. I'm not against that actually happening. I'm not against them actually being a nation within a nation, because I think the government, provincial, federal, and municipal, all of them overstep their bounds way too much and way too often. I would love to see a model I call competitive governments come into play or emerge. What that is basically, there's different governments, right? Different little regional governments with completely different laws. That way everyone could live the way they want to live. You want to have a Puritan Christian hardcore society? I have no problem with that, as long as everyone in that society agrees to that worldview. But as opposingly, if you want a free market libertarian society where, you know what, people are free to have sex and to basically consume whatever drugs they want, you have no right to force that will against anyone else. Anyways, continuing with the article, according to the quotes, this lady said, "We are warriors. Warrior societies are boots on the ground to emancipate people, to have the people rise up. We are a nation. We are above Canada. We are above it all because we are a nation. Canada is a corporation. We are a nation. And when we signed onto our pre-Confederation treaties, it was on a nation-to-nation basis. We signed it with the British nation, not Canada." Well, Ezra, I've seen actually a video of Ezra Levant. He went over some of the treaties, and it sure sounds like it was a treaty of surrender. And while at the same time, while the claims rooted in history might be spurious to many across the country, Canada's security agency has taken the warriors seriously for a long time. Initially connected to the extremist native movements in the United States, such as Red Power and the American Indian movement in the 1970s, the Canadian movement really took root in the 1980s. Most Canadians first saw the Red Warrior flag during the Oka crisis in Quebec in 1990, when Mohawks and their warriors blocked access to burial grounds set to be developed into a golf course. I can understand why that would even anger them. Anyway, yesterday I interviewed the author of this article, Kriss, who is a reporter for Sun News. Now we're going to play that interview.
SWN, SWN Resources Canada Inc. is a Texas-based oil and gas company that has license. They are allowed to search for shale oil. So, of course, shale gas, shale oil, which is embedded deep within the rocks under New Brunswick. So they've got seismic testing in and around a place called Rexton, New Brunswick. It's about an hour outside of Moncton, New Brunswick. And they've been testing in and around the area for about a year or so. Well, there's a local group of Native Indians or First Nations, depending on what term you want to use, that don't like fracking, and they oppose it. So they were starting to blockade their equipment, and then things got a little bit more ugly over the summertime, and they apparently and allegedly started destroying some of their equipment. Actually, SWN Resources is suing some of the so-called warriors civilly in court, along with charging them criminally. They're alleging that they torched a $400,000 drill, and that they also smashed up some seismic testing equipment. So fast forward to October 17th, that's when things got really ugly. The RCMP had a court order in their hand for 2 weeks to move protesters from away from this fracking equipment. So this is testing equipment that had been blockaded by protesters illegally. The company went to court, successfully got an injunction saying, hey, get out of the way, we need access to our stuff, and we need access to it safely. RCMP sat on it for a couple of weeks and then rolled in on October 17th. That's when we've seen all of the footage of the big fight between the cops. It was pepper spray and beanbag rounds coming from the police, and it was Molotov cocktails and rocks coming from the protesters. I must also stress that it wasn't just Native Indian protesters and warrior protesters. There were also you'd call them the rank and file anti-fracking movement, the environmentalists who don't want this sort of thing there. So they all teamed up and they fought the cops. They also saw 6 marked police cars, RCMP cars, torched. That's the famous scene that a lot of people have seen online and on TV, and so they burned those right down to the ground. Fast forward to October 19th, after the round of bail hearings and a bunch of arrests, I went to the site near the supposed fracking site, right where the cop cars had been torched down. Everybody was busy, including myself, and we didn't really get a chance to actually shoot the desiccated, burned out cop car hulls over the last day and a half. So I was there by myself. I'm a mobile journalist, which means I'm the lady in front of the camera, I'm also the camera person, and I'm the driver, and I wash the dishes. So I was there by myself with my camera. There was also Laura Brown, who is also a mobile journalist, so she's by herself with Global in a marked car. I was in my own personal car with no markings. And then CTV, they had a runabout vehicle, and they also had a $1 million satellite truck, those big honkin' national satellite trucks with 2 operators. It's a sat truck operator and a camera guy. So altogether, we were there, 5 of us from various media sources at about noon on Saturday, shooting these dead cars. And there was nobody else there. There were no cops, no protesters. We weren't trespassing on anybody's land. It was a public parking lot in the middle of the woods in Rexton. All of a sudden, 2 cars pull up and a bunch of people get out, about 6 of them, I think. It's hard to recall correctly, about 6 of them, and they started screaming and cursing and swearing, saying, I'm going to F you up, I'm going to smash that camera. If you don't get out of here, I'm going to burn those things down. He pointed at the CTV truck and said, that's going where those ones went.
Why are they so angry? Do you know why they were so angry?
They hate the media. They absolutely hated our guts. They wanted us to leave. They say we don't do the story right and that we twist things and tell lies. And by they and we, they meant all of us. Myself, who I luckily was not marked, CTV and Global.
So they're not just targeting Sun News?
No, they did not know I was with Sun News, and that's probably for the best. Because of the violent reaction they had against something as mainstream as Global and CTV, I can't imagine they would have been big fans of Sun News Network, considering the stance that some of our editorial board has taken.
Well, that's interesting. Well, who owns the land? Like, the land that this fracking is going on? Is it Crown land? Is it native land? Is it, whose land is it?
This is Crown land. Completely Crown land. The notion that an oil company would go onto somebody's reserve land and just start illegally fracking is preposterous. I think everybody who understands title and natural resources and laws would know that wouldn't happen. And if it did, there'd be major hell to pay. This is Crown land, but the sticky issue is that some of the Native Indians there say that all Crown land is their land. And so that's where the that's a sticky. You're right. It is a sticky issue. I think the whole issue with the natives and land needs to be resolved. Like, I'm all for giving them a chunk of Crown land and make them completely responsible. But I'm all about, as a libertarian, I'm all about property rights. So let's give them a chunk of land and let them have property rights. Let them have the mineral rights. Let them actually have that. I'm not against that. But I'm just curious to get your getting the facts. But. Sorry. No sweat. Yeah, they were. It wasn't just Sun News, obviously, and thankfully they didn't know it was Sun News. But they hated Global and they hated CTV, who are very mild in the reporting.
Well, I think they're fairly forgiving of them. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they actually said, you're not like Miles, who is a blogger who's been sleeping at the protest site for about a month. So to them, it was only this one specific person that was allowed to tell the news. And then also it came out that they only trust Al Jazeera and sometimes APTN, but not always.
Well, that's interesting. So I want to go into what do you think the impetus is of this the protest? What are the goals? Like, they just want to shut down all fracking? What is the deal?
When I was speaking before getting carjacked, and I will stress, after we all tried to leave, they surrounded our vehicles and they carjacked Global and CTV. They threatened them directly, and they got out of their cars, hands up, no iPhone, no cameras, nothing, and marched them down the street in the middle of the woods. I got out by begging their leader and appealing to him as the guy in charge to let me out with my own private car, and we all drove together to the RCMP detachment. In Richard-Bucktoo.
So they actually took your property. They actually carjacked you.
They stole CTV and Global's property under threat. They carjacked those people, and they tried to do it to me. They threatened to drag me out of my car.
Oh wow! So do you want to get into that situation a little bit?
Well, I don't think this has really happened before in Canada, let alone in sleepy rural New Brunswick. I've been a reporter for a long time, like 16 years long time. I've been to protests, anti-Bush protests, I've been to WTO protests, I've been to all sorts of protests. It can get rough. People can get really angry, and that's understandable. But in the clear blue sky on a sunny Saturday, having people pull up out of cars and then threaten to torch your property and drag you out of your car, that kind of raised some eyebrows, and it was pretty frightening. So we're pressing charges. I don't know what Global and CTV have done. They might be rolling over on it in order to get access to interviews. I'm not sure. Sun's not putting up with it. We're pressing charges, myself personally, and the network.
Well, I haven't heard any actual reporting on any of those other networks. To the best of your knowledge, has they reported this incident?
They reported it a bit the night that it happened, and a little bit in the local media on Global, but unfortunately they didn't really say exactly what happened. They really seemed to want to downplay what happened. But I'll tell you, the 3 CTV guys that were there and the Global person that was there, it was very frightening. And those people were not goofing around. They weren't just there like, some guy being a jerk. We're used to that. But these people were directly threatening us. So it was not a very nice situation. As far as their goal, when I was speaking to some of the so-called warriors or self-appointed warriors at court, Susan Patels, who calls herself a lieutenant, American pronunciation, I will note, within the Warrior Society. I said, what about any kind of fracking or regular oil drilling? And she said, none. No oil, no gas, nothing. Leave it under the ground. We can all use sustainable resources somehow. And
is that what they want to do with just their land, or is that they want to impose on everybody? Because honestly, I'm all about property rights. I'm okay. If you don't want fracking on your land, I'm cool with that. That's great. But if I want to do something on my land, then I think you have no right to use the guns of government to enforce your will against me.
According to her, and nowhere on the planet.
Oh wow! So
yeah.
they're not respecting the choices and the rights of others to do what they want on their property.
No, they considered the entire Atlantic Basin, including private property, to be Mi'kmaq property.
Well, I don't. Like I said, I'm all for giving the natives some sort of compensation or some sort of property rights, but I don't know how many natives were back before the colonization of North America by the Europeans, but I really have a hard time thinking that they can claim the whole continent as theirs.
Well, some, and this is, again, it's probably not all of them, probably not even the majority, but those of the Warrior Society that I have spoken with, and now it's becoming a very, very hot topic within academic circles, actually. Colonist studies is now popping up on different course descriptions. The idea that all of Turtle Island belongs only to Native Indian people has become very fashionable in a lot of academic circles, and the Warriors, at least for the Mi'kmaq that I was speaking with, or Micmac, depending on how you pronounce it, they think the entire Atlantic Basin is theirs and that they never ever ceded it. However, if you go back and read the peace and friendship treaties, they do. They cede all title.
Even if they can claim that it does their due to homesteading theory, you can't. Like you can if you have some previously untouched land and you mix your labor with it, that land inherently becomes yours. It's basic Lockean homestead theory. And
they would dismiss all of that as settler theory.
Well, I don't know. Fair enough.
I'm not going to speak for them, but that's
no. I hear what you're saying, and I'm just like, well, I don't think you have a. I think I think that point of view is very ethnocentric and just not really based in reality. But anyways, I want to get into a little bit about who is funding these or who's funding these groups. Your network has, to a certain degree, covered the funding of environmental groups by U.S. foundations. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
I can. I'm not the expert in it. I know my colleague Ezra Levant has done an awful lot of research into this. He's also a trained lawyer, and you don't want to get into an argument with that guy. Based on what he has said and what he has published, the Tides Foundation does an awful lot of funding anti-fracking movements. Apparently, a lot of money comes in from the Middle East who are funding anti-fracking movements, and they, of course, are connected to Al Jazeera, which makes a nice little bow. And they apparently don't want fracking because it would cut into their bottom line. More people finding abundant and cheap shale oil and gas. That means they're bringing in fewer Middle East barrels of oil and gas. So there's the argument there. There's also apparently Rockefeller money going into it. A lot of American philanthropic kind of left-wing green money goes into the anti-fracking movements here in Canada. It's really kind of a kitchen door that swings both ways a lot of the time. I know Mr. George Soros is behind some of these anti-fracking movements as far as money goes and encouragement goes. And again, it's a free country. You are allowed, if you have money, to put your money into charities. If you don't want fracking, you are allowed fully to put your money into anti-fracking charities.
Well, I would consider philanthropy completely different than charity, because charity is helping people who are down and downtrodden. Philanthropy is basically putting money towards your pet political causes. Now, I just want to stop you here because I'm on the website of the Global Justice Ecology Project, and one of the main organizers for the Idle No More group is a guy named Clayton Thomas Mueller, and he is a member. He has a biography of him on this website, and he says that he is a member of the Polaris Institute. Now, I have another website open, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which they said shows that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is funding the Polaris Institute. So that there's right there that connection, that connection with American money. Also, are you familiar with United Nations Agenda 21? Because to me, all this goes back to United Nations. In fact, this Thomas Mueller guy, he admits in his biography that he was traveled extensively domestically and internationally, leading indigenous delegations to the United Nations to lobby United Nations bodies, including the UN Framework Conference on Climate Change and the UN Earth Summit, the Rio Plus 20 conference.
Sure. Well, Agenda 21, it's actually not that long of a document. It's interesting that Glenn Beck wanted to use it in a fictional sort of way to really put the jam in with the pill, so to speak, to get the message out there about what they mean when an educrat or a bureaucrat in the United Nations, when they say sustainable development. Well, according to Agenda 21, as far as I can read it, sustainable development, ideally in some people's very specific and somewhat radical minds, would see the majority of human beings living in hyper-urban centers, in very, very small houses, often not houses that they own themselves, often with fees attached to all of that for everything from recycling to, environmental fees, those sort of things, not having a car, not having their own personal form of transportation or an out route at all. They don't like the idea of affecting the earth. And what upsets a lot of people with the issue of Agenda 20, as far as I can read it, and I don't need to tell you about it, I'm sure you're all over it, is the notion that anything that affects the environment is somehow bad. Well, you and I sitting here speaking on an electronic device and breathing is affecting the environment. And so to have that kind of vague language is what really rings a lot of alarm bells, especially for those of us who are libertarian in nature, who want property rights, who want to raise our own children, who want to own firearms, who want to bloody well be left alone and to live our own lives as long as we aren't hurting anybody else. And I think that's what really frightens people about something like Agenda 21. And quite often, you're right, when I'm speaking with some folks, obviously not people who are, burning cars down and threatening me directly, we're not chatting about the UN, but in more of a civilized sort of manner when I'm speaking with, say, an academic who specializes in indigenous rights or colonist theory, they will often cite things like the United Nations declarations on Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples, saying that, they've got title to all of the land and that the settler governments need to make amends with that. That's quite often they will cite the UN. So you're right in pointing out that the United Nations is involved, or at least in spirit, in a lot of this.
Well, they are. I just brought up the land use philosophy of Agenda 21. I think Agenda 21, Chapter 10, Paragraph 13 says the integrated approach and planning and management of land resources, which deals with the reorganization and, where necessary, some strengthening of the decision-making structure, including existing policies, planning, and management procedures, and methods that can assist in putting in place an integrated approach to land resources. So basically, to me, and I'm not a lawyer, so if I'm wrong, I apologize, but to me that reads like Soviet-style central planning. There's no speaking of the rights of the individual or the rights of the person. It's more like the rights of the community with a communitarianist point of view, which to me, communitarianism is just a synonym for communism.
Or collectivism, if you want to go in Ayn Rand's route. This is all collectivism. You're right, and you don't need to be a lawyer to be able to read that. It's actually quite plain English. But what really gets me, though, is that in all of my reporting, you can meet people on the right or the left, it doesn't matter. Those who are libertarian and who value personal, independent freedoms and personal rights that go along with personal responsibilities, and they want to bloody well be left alone, they come, this is an overused phrase, but it's true, they often come from all shapes and sizes, they're from all ethnic backgrounds, they might have been born into a certain religious caste, they may still carry that, even though they're libertarian, it takes all kinds, but the thing is that they can see this written down by the UN, and they can take it or leave it. They can not implement it if they're a city councilor. They can not implement it if they're a mayor or a provincial MP or an MPP. They don't have to. The thing is that with the UN and Agenda 21, it's all a choice. You can ratify and sign on to these things if you want to as a country. But what a lot of academics and specialists, especially with Sun, have been pointing out, and sometimes with the National Post, is we kind of sleptwalked through the 70s and 80s a lot of times and just signed up onto feel-good treaties and agreements with the UN and ratified things saying, yeah, that sounds good. Who wants landmines? Who doesn't want to stop gun running in Africa? Those are bad things. Let's sign up. But the devil is always in the details. And sometimes an academic or, say, a Supreme Court justice will say, Canada, see here, you signed this with the UN. So in order to live up to our UN treaty and not embarrass us on the world stage, we have got to implement A, B, C, or D. I must stress also that, apart from, somebody's worldview, the UN doesn't have their own army of cops who will come to your house and make you do this. It's a way of shaming your country and your elected representatives on the world stage. And if you don't like what the UN is saying, or what the UN is proposing, you got to make that clear to your elected representatives so they don't sign on to these things in the first place. Again, if you're all for it, giver. I mean, go for it. It's not up to me to tell you how to live. But I think often people don't realize that when we sign up to some of these feel-good things, that it will eventually come back to you where you have to live up to the obligations that are listed.
Well, it's interesting because I think that in her book, Elaine Dewar talked to, I'm sure you're familiar with Maurice Strong.
Yes, I've heard the name for sure.
Basically, she said, because she interviewed him, and she said that he admitted to being to basically creating a semi-private but publicly funded intelligence influence network that had influence in both Canada and abroad. And he agreed to that. He agreed that that's what it was, but he just never heard it put in those terms before. See, the way I think of it is, you have all these foundations, whether it's the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, or the Hewlett Foundation, Packard Foundation. What they do is they fund the NGOs that speak for them, that are promoting the agenda they want to push. So they give money to these NGOs, which in turn make noise to basically create the impression that there's a actual grassroots movement to want to create what they're obviously already wanting to create. And if you don't sing from the song sheet, you don't get money. And then you have organizations like ICLEI, the International Council for Local and Environmental Initiatives, which is basically being pushed in every municipality in Canada. You have the ICLEI website where it says the main cities that are in it, but also you have the federal federal municipal communities or something. Federation of Canadian Municipalities, yep. Which by de facto has most municipalities in Canada. And if you look on the ICLEI website, it says that everyone in that federation, or in that, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, is a member of ICLEI. Mm-hmm. So that's how that's pushed, and it's pushed on the local levels.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And a lot of people may not realize that. Now, again, I spent 11 years living in downtown Ottawa with no car. I rode my bike to work. It was not a big plot that I had. I chose to live that way. And not every city councilor or town councilor who wants a bike lane or who wants us to not have gigantic landfills is part of this Agenda 21 plan. But you're right. It trickles down. And if we all start thinking along the lines of, oh, well, you better not even own private property, because in owning private property in your own hands, it could come to bad things. You could wreck it. You could wreck that tree. You could burn down that grass by mistake. Something might spill out of your house. We better have government take care of all of that. You're right. If you extend that down the road and you take it to that level, it could become complete government control. And all of us have been warned time and time again that government never shrinks on its own. That the more you let it grow, the bigger and bigger it will grow. And unless you stand up for your individual property rights and your personal rights, that it's going to happen again and again. That's why we had such a big stink in High River. That's why it was so important to hammer home the fact that the RCMP kicked in locked doors of private dwellings and took property in the form of firearms. Firearms that were sometimes in plain view, and otherwise firearms that were safely stored. Sometimes so much so that they were tucked behind bags of water treatment chemicals in the basement, in a closet, and yet the police would phone up and say, that was in plain view, after I opened the door, and after I kicked in the door. And if you don't check power, it will just grow exponentially. And that's not an ideological standpoint, that's just a fact. I don't care if your government is right-wing or left-wing or in the middle. If you continue to let it build and build and breed, it will eventually erode your own personal rights. And you're right. If you can look up a lot of Canadian municipalities and you look in the details, a lot of it does read like Agenda 21 because they all want to jump on the bandwagon, and these things sound so nice.
well, it also appeals to a certain member of the certain segment of the population with I say, progressive political bent. But it's interesting you bring up communist societies and like that, because honestly, if you look at the environmental record of Soviet Russia or communist China, they're atrocious. They are like communist countries have the worst record for environmentalism. It's through private property where people care about their land. Like my father, he was a farmer for for a good chunk of his life, and he deeply cared about the land. He had a deep connection to his land. I tell you what, he cared more about his land than any of these trendies in the cities did. I tell you that. And it's also I think that this philosophy, it really is about getting people off the land, because you take someone like Elson Redford, basically she's implementing the Alberta Land Use Framework, which is basically making it very, very difficult to have a business on the land, and also it's removing your property rights, basically the idea that you are secure in your property, so the government can arbitrarily rescind your rights to the land, so it makes it there's less of an incentive to have a business on the land, because there's no protections. There's nothing protecting your interest, nothing protecting your business, nothing protecting your investment. So they can rescind your property rights at any time. And I genuinely do think that is the goal of Agenda 21, is to basically cut off a huge amount of the wildlife of land from human habitation and use, so they can jam you in the cities.
Yeah, because if you're in a city and you're in a climate-controlled tower in your own little unit, you're way easier to control. And it doesn't even need to be some sort of George Orwell, Oceania-type control. It's just darn convenient to tax you, to educate your children, to monitor what kind of literature you're reading. And it could all be, fuzzy and happy. I mean, we have to remember that in Brave New World, people were damn happy. They were just drunk and stoned out of their minds. It wasn't this sort of hellish situation that we saw in Orwell's parable, in Orwell's 1984. So it doesn't have to be this terrifying jackbooted thing where you look out your window one day and there's, black armored vehicles rolling down the street. But it's still control. If the government is telling you from what food you can eat, to how you can raise your children, to what kind of things you can and cannot grow on your own land, what kind of animals you can and cannot keep, how tall you can build your building, what source of energy you can use, that is still control. What choice do you have after that? What you're watching on TV? What kind of book you decide to read on your Kindle? And even then, they can still be spying on you. And it gets down to the issue of liberty. If you want to live on your own and do your own thing and be a private person, quite often you will choose to live in a more rural area. Right now, I'm in a rural area. And people are more independent. You aren't screaming to government to fix everything. You chop your own wood. You often fix your own car. You manage your own household. And you're right. I like your point about your dad being a farmer and being a steward of the land. Hunters are some of the best conservationists and outdoorsmen and woodsmen you'll ever find. Why? Because they spend time in the woods. Most folks who hate hunting, who live downtown in the annex in Toronto, don't go in the woods. They'd be terrified. And sorry, driving up to your cottage doesn't count with the woods on either side of you. People who truly live in and around nature love it and appreciate it, and they respect it because they know it. And that will ultimately be the major problem, if apart from losing personal liberty, if it does work in getting everybody ultra-urbanized and crowded into the cities, it'll all fall to hell out here, because there will be nobody here to actually manage or keep an eye on anything.
Well, I have to, you said it doesn't have to be a jackbooted thug thing, and maybe I'm not as forgiving of I'm a little bit more skeptical of the state. I think really what they want is a soft tyranny, basically, where everything's happy and go lucky, but there's still the violent consequences of the state if you cross that certain line.
Sure, of course. You could read into it that way very easily. Aldous Huxley, like I was referencing with Brave New World, it was soft tyranny there. Everybody seemed to be kind of happy. But you're right, the moment you did step out of line, you still had the ultimate price to pay, and you weren't even allowed to travel. And so it's ordering you to follow orders with a smile on your face. It's still awful.
It's interesting that you mentioned Aldous Huxley, because are you familiar with his brother Julian Huxley?
No, actually.
His brother Julian Huxley was actually the first director of UNESCO.
Huh.
And he wrote a report called UNESCO and Its Purpose, where he basically called for UNESCO to basically use its influence in education and science and culture to push for a world government based on eugenics. I have the report right here.
That's ironic. All right. I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I also think
Take our family, I must stress.
yeah, fair enough. You know, they're not the exact same. They're not the same person, but it is interesting to know that connection. Yeah, it's written in, I think, 1948. It was called UNESCO and Its Purpose. It's interesting. I think the main goal for Agenda 21 is global governance, though. I think it is to raise Lane Dewar even said that, an investigative reporter who, interviewed Suzuki, interviewed Maurice Strong, interviewed all the people, directors leading up to the Rio conference, and she came to the same conclusions that I have, that basically it is to raise governance to the global level as opposed to real decision making to the global level, and kind of not take it away from the national level. And I think any governance needs to be done as close to the people as possible, because that gives them the most ability to be heard, right? I think and the ironic thing is, a lot of these people who are supposed anarchists, the Black Bloc, the anarcho-communists, they're actually working with the unions, with all these institutions that are funded by the foundations that are actually trying to bring in global governance. And they use that term quite frequently in the various foundations and the various think tanks, global governance.
It's true, and a lot of people think that that's just a peachy idea. I'm a big Star Trek fan, but I understand that it's fiction, and that the notion of one world government would be awful, because you're right, the further and further away you get from the actual person who's feeling the effects of the law and decision-making, the more interference you're going to have, and the less that person is going to be heard. In fact, they're not going to be heard at all. The most change you ever do affect is with your local government, and it's funny to take a phrase out of their playbook. You got to think local. You got to think globally and act locally, and that's because you affect real change locally. But the idea that they want to take that local power away and put it up in some sort of echelon with, International Criminal Court or the United Nations, something like that, something that's bigger and more powerful even than that, is pretty surprising. That they would want to say that your local government matters so much that they will trickle down Agenda 21 ideas or ideals, depending on your opinion on them, into your local town council, and yet they want to control it globally. I don't know. I find that there's a big disconnect there. Especially, you're right, also with the Black Bloc crowd, who say that they want to be free in their own way, and yet they're taking money and spouting collectivist ideas.
Well, you have to understand, there's various ideas of anarchism. There's anarcho-capitalists, which basically are just libertarians who believe in the free market so much that they don't think the state needs to even exist, that all the services that the state provides can be handled by private individuals working voluntarily. Then there's anarcho-communism, which is completely different. Anarcho-communism is basically, they put this, there's a phrase they like to use. It boils everything down. Property is theft.
Yeah, well, now you can't be more ideologically opposed to those of us at Sun News Network who are libertarian and who value private property rights than that. Private property to us is freedom. And it means that you control your own destiny and your own life and your own family, and government back off. So the notion that property is theft, that's oil and water.
Yeah, I don't agree with that either, and far from it. But I want to talk to you now about the institution. You mentioned the academics. Now, I find, from my research, the academics play a huge role in promoting this Agenda 21 mentality. Recently, I found out that the University of Alberta, through the Parkland Institute, hosted a 3-day event back in 2010 where activists came from, I'm assuming all over the country, or at least over 50 activists came there to be trained by an author and lecturer named Derek Jensen, who literally does advocate for the violent overthrow of industrialized society using eco-terrorism, blowing up dams, blowing up the electrical grid, to bring basically us back to an agrarian, pre-industrialized existence. And actually, also, he spoke at the University in Victoria, too, UVic.
Wow, yeah, I did a very scant bit of reading on him, so I can't really attest to his, but going off what you said, that's pretty disturbing, and it actually doesn't surprise me. Some of the theories that have been practiced at university are neat in theory, but if you actually put them into practice, it could do an awful lot of damage. The notion that, like you said, property is theft. Well, can you actually picture that? Can you actually picture police or the government or the state in some way coming in and tearing people out of their own homes and burning their personal and private property down to the ground, putting them in pens? Like, is that the end game for people who say property is theft? And,
well, it's interesting. In the early, I think it was the 1930s, there was a Spanish Civil War. Now, the anarcho-communists, they actually were able to hold on to a piece of land, to basically hold on to a section of the country, and actually were the dominant force there for a while, and literally they wholesalely slaughtered. They killed thousands of people just for their political affiliations, according to an article I read from George Mason University. And then above all this, they justified it. They just like, oh well, when this is just a natural expression of the people assuming control from the bourgeoisie.
Doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me. If you read Ayn Rand's biography, I'm sure you're well aware of it, or even it's almost her autobiography, We the Living, where they seized private property willy-nilly, dragged people out into the street, shot them in the head if they disagreed. They purged millions of their own people in Soviet Russia. So none of that would surprise me at all. The notion of private property was completely foreign to, think of it, generations and generations of people in Soviet Russia. I have a very good friend who survived out of Soviet Russia and who emigrated here to Canada in the late 1990s. And he lived in kind of an oil and gas industrial town 8 hours out of St. Petersburg. You often only hear of Moscow and St. Petersburg. He used to actually take 2 pails, this is in the 80s, 2 big buckets on a big stick and carry them medieval style on his shoulders, go through the woods in the middle of the night to go to a lady's farm to get contraband milk for his children. Because the only food that was available legally from the state were various forms of pickles and onions. There was nothing else to eat at the state-controlled grocery store. So he would go in the dead of night through the woods with wolves, and this is a guy who's telling you this deadpan. Oh, there were some wolves, right? Like, you're sitting there going, oh my God, you can't believe it, living, in the lap of luxury, comparatively speaking, here in Canada. Yeah. But that's what he did to feed his children. So we don't need to reach too far back in history to see what statism looks like.
Well, I want to go back to Derek Jensen, because it's not just Jensen. Like, he openly, he's featured in a film called N.Civ, where they advocate this anti-human perspective. But, sure. There's a video on YouTube called The Worst of Derek Jensen, where he openly says, yeah, we need people to blow up dams, yeah, we need people to blow up the electrical grid, and it's not their problem it's not up to them to make sure the people who are affected by the outage of power know how to cook over an open fire. Like, this is literally what this guy wants, but unfortunately, it's not rare. Like, if you look at any of the universities, a lot of them are funded by the same foundations that are funding these anti-fracking groups or any of these anti-industry groups.
It's true, and I don't even need to name him personally. That's fine. Like, I take what you're saying at face value. I've read lots of academics who say basically that humans are a virus, and that the Earth would be better off without it. That somehow Gaia itself, as an Earth, as a living orb floating around our sun, orbiting around our sun, is a perfect and pure thing, and that we, human beings, the entire human race, are a mistake, and that we shouldn't be here, and that if we're here at all, we should be in some sort of very humble Cro-Magnon or primate form. They think this, and if their ideas ever actually gained power, we would see wholesale slaughter. Thankfully, they're usually contained in the echo chambers of ivory towers and academia, and most people never hear from them. They never read their journals, they never read their articles, they're never on TV, they're never on the radio. These people don't get out into the mainstream, so nobody knows what kind of crazy they're talking, except for their students, who have to sit there and probably parrot the line.
That's the dangerous part, though, because these students are actually sitting there listening at a very impressional time in their life. Yeah.
And there's nobody coming in to say, wait, this person's crazy.
Yeah.
They're sitting there thinking, wow, gosh, I got here to university and this is the truth. God, I better get on with it.
Yeah.
I better write up this essay pretty darn quick.
Or and also think about that. If you're being imbued with these ideas at a time where you're young, you're impressionable. I want to get your thoughts on, because I've heard this said before, and I tend to agree with it, that the new left is almost nihilistic. It's the old left. Yeah, they were communists, they were socialists, but they at least wanted to improve humanity. These people just seem to hate everything.
Yeah, I think that goes along with what you were saying earlier and what I mentioned earlier about the idea of humanity and human beings just being a virus, a mistake, a blip. I think that it goes hand in hand with nihilism, that nothing is worth anything. And even Rand talked about it in all through her books when it was really starting to get going in the 1950s and 1960s, that nothing is anything. And that reality itself is simply a construct between your own ears. Now, you want to talk about when narcissism met nihilism, that's postmodernism. In fact, it was Al Gore that said that. It was one of the smart things he ever said, is that postmodernism is when narcissism met nihilism. When you become so self-absorbed that you turn in on yourself and say that nothing from outside of my own skull exists, and therefore you can opine on it and obliterate all of it, and your own whim, to your own whim and your own ideal, that's terrifying, because that means you don't value anyone else's life, and you're capable of doing very terrible things.
Yeah, I just think that it's very, very scary, because I think a lot of this is rooted in what I would call moral relativism, like that everything is subjective reality, that there's nothing that's real, there's nothing that's concrete, everything's just 2 + 2 could equal 5. We have to sit there and think about it. You know what I mean? Every point of view is valid, and that there's no such thing as objective reality.
There is such a thing as objective reality, because you and I are having this conversation unless we're having a shared hallucination, which is actually something that academics base their entire career on, if you can believe it or not. You're right. This is a major problem, and not to connect it all to what the really heavy stuff we were talking about earlier about Nazism or genocide or anything like that. But for example, take the current issue of the White Poppy campaign. There's a group of academics in Ottawa who are pacifists who are starting a White Poppy campaign, which is completely fundamentally wrong according to the Canadian Legion and any war veteran who's actually been out there and bled on the battlefield. I've spoken with them myself. I've talked to World War II vets myself, and they told me we did not bleed white. White in military is a flag of surrender. And the notion of wearing a pacifist poppy, in their words, the folks who are wearing them, they say, I get to choose how I want to celebrate Remembrance Day. So they didn't say mark or note, they said celebrate, so they're completely oblivious as to what this solemn occasion is supposed to be. But they're so special and precious that they get to define the terms of what remembrance is. Now, of course, we all know, if we've gone to school or read a book, that the red in the poppy represents the blood of those who are dead, who died. It's supposed to be a national funeral. It's not supposed to glorify war. It's supposed to honor the dead, the fallen. That's why there's a dead guy in the tomb of the unknown soldier at the National War Memorial. That is a tomb. But these folks will stand over the corpse of a dead person who died for their freedom, who died in the First World War, and other people who died in the Second World War, and people who came back maimed from Afghanistan after 9/11. They will stand there, not blinking, saying, I get to choose how I want to celebrate Remembrance Day, and I'm special, so I'll wear a white poppy. It all goes hand in hand with this age of narcissism that we're in, and you're right, moral relativism. I can take it and make 2 + 2 make 5. I can see monkey meaning into existence, and that's just fun.
Interesting. So yeah, that the White Poppy campaign, I'm a little bit torn on. I don't know if
dude, don't be. Talk to any veteran, man. Talk to any veteran. Yeah. I talk to any veteran. I've had the honor and the privilege, and people say that a lot, but I really, really mean it, of going to every National War Memorial Remembrance Day, and even when I was a kid, I went to the war memorials. You speak to them, no veteran who was on the battlefields in the Second World War, who has had their legs bloody well blown off in Afghanistan, glorifies war. They all support the red poppy because it's to honor dead people. The notion of a white poppy is for pacifism, saying we shouldn't fight any.
I'm not a pacifist. I for sure I'm not a pacifist. I just thought, my thought process was, war can sometimes be used to glorify nationalism, and sure. I'm doing a lot of research on I'm reading a really thick history book, and a lot of it covers World War One, and and I'm also reading Murray Rothbard's dissertation on World War One, and honestly, from what I've read so far, it seems like World War One was an incredibly needless war that was dragged on much longer than it needed to be by arrogant world leaders.
Oh, sure.
And that's why I was somewhat sympathetic to the White Poppy campaign, because it's like,
yeah. But again, it's not to glorify what happened. It's to go, oh my God, that happened. They're dead. Those guys can't speak for themselves because they're dead. They're rotting in graves over in France, and the poppies grow row on row. That's what that poem was for. It wasn't to say, gosh, I'm great. I'm glad Prince Sepp got shot here, and that a whole bunch of treaties between different countries all collapsed in on themselves and caused us all to go into this war that made trench warfare meet machine warfare with disgustingly horrible, deadly results. I mean, you're right. The carnage and the body count in the First World War is breathtaking. It's hell. But that was the purpose of the red poppy. And so you can do what you want, of course, because I'm not going to dictate to you.
No, I hear what you're saying.
Any veteran I've ever spoken to, man, it's that's what that's for.
All right. Well, I'm happy to stand corrected. That's fair. I just, like I said, I've been doing a lot of reading and research on World War One, and it just seems not only disgusting but needless. So needless. Like I don't even like World War II, but you can make the argument that something needs to be done about Hitler. But World War One just seems so needless.
It does, and again, I'll leave that to the real professors, the true history professors who know it so well. But you're right. I think the average take on World War One is, oh my God. Like, how much more horrible could have you been to send row after row and line after line of these young men up to face artillery fire? It was a terrible loss of life.
Anything else you want to say, clean up on before we go?
No, that was really interesting. Is this going to be kind of broadcast on your own website, or how does this work exactly?
It's going to be on my YouTube channel, my website, once I relaunch it, and I'm going to probably play it as a broadcast on my live show.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so it's on your YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Okay. And do I get that just by searching your name?
You should, yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to say before we go? And,
No, just thank you very much for having me. It's really interesting, and I'm really encouraged that people who value freedom and personal liberty and personal property rights and just doing your own thing are actually have their own shows. It's awesome.
All right, well, thanks a lot for coming on. I'd like to have you on again.
Hey, you bet, anytime.
All right, thanks.